Hey guys, MEP Guy here, and welcome to my MEP Families 101 Building Families Masterclass. Now in this lesson, we're going to start things off by showing you guys how to build these 3 boxes. Now, if you cannot build a box in Revit, then you really can't build much. So we're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about how to use type parameters versus instance parameters, and we're also going to show you guys how to get these little grips in a 3D view so you can manipulate your families any which way you want. And we're going to go over all of the basics as we go. So, as in Revit, it's always good to learn the basics before you get going with the more complex tasks. So we're just going to start here with some basic stuff. So this box right here is a box family type, meaning that it's using type parameters to control the different sizes of the box. So that's how this one works. And then we have this one, which is an instance parameter based, meaning that you can change the parameters even though you might have multiple types in a project, but you can just change the dimensions of this box any which way you want. Very powerful tool. And in this one, we've basically done the same thing with instances, but we've added these 3D grips. So we're going to show you guys how to get those inside your model. So stay tuned, and here we go. So we're just going to open up a brand new project. We're going to go to File, New, and we're going to pick a template, but we're actually going to hit this Browse button, and that will bring up all the default templates Revit has to offer. Since we're making MEP families, we want to use the Systems default template because it includes mechanical, electrical, and plumbing families already built in. So let's click Open, and let's click OK. Once Revit loads up, we can start to do our thing. So let's go ahead and go to File, New, Family. So right here you'll see that Revit has a bunch of templates that you can work from when you're creating families. Now this is English I. If I go back up one, you can see you can choose from different languages here, but we're going to stick to English I for English Imperial. And we're going to go down and we're going to select what's called a generic model. Now the generic model template is the most basic template inside of Revit. So we're going to use that. So all that it contains are some reference lines, and we'll take a look at those. We're going to hit Open. So now that the generic model family template is open, you can see that there are some reference planes here. If I hover into them, you can see this one's the front back. And then if I hover into this one's the left right. Now we also want to pay attention to the new interface that Revit has displayed for us. You can see there's some new tools up here, so I can create extrusions and some of the 3D geometry that's required for families. I can create model line, and then these are the things that are going to be brand new, and we'll talk a lot about these later, and these are all the connectors. I can also create more reference lines or reference planes, and I can set my work planes for working. Over here, you'll see the properties, and now this is the property of this view, this reference level view inside the family editor. And so there's a couple of different things you can do here. And then you can also see the project browser. So it has its own project browser inside the family editor. And we'll be using this to navigate around our family. Now, it's actually always best to kind of sketch out your family before you start inside of Revit. So get a blank piece of paper and sketch out all the things that you might need for your family, because it's just going to help organize all your thoughts. So for this first family, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a box. It's just going to be a simple box. So let's start up here with extrusion. Let's click the extrusion button, and you'll see a new toolbar show up here, and we can use all these drawing tools to create our extrusion. So we're going to be creating the profile. So let's start with a rectangle. And we can just zoom in here, and we can just kind of draw a rectangle, about this axis. And we'll talk a little bit about where this axis is in a second. So once I draw my profile, I can click into these little dimensions, and I can set it to maybe like 1 by 1. And so that looks great. And I can also move my extrusion around. So if I select all my stuff and click the move command, I can kind of move this profile wherever I want. So if I want to get it exactly center, I would have to hit the midpoint here and maybe click it to here, and then move it again from this midpoint to this midpoint. And then I'll hit escape. And now we have our little profile of our box that we're creating. I can finish the extrusion off right here by hitting finish edit mode, and I have my extrusion. So let's take a look at what this thing looks like in 3D. So let's click over here to 3D views, view number 1, double click, and we'll hit escape, and we'll zoom out, and you can see that we have a little cube that we've created. Now down here we can set our detail level and our visual style. So if I want to have a shaded, I can click here and click shaded, and now I can see things in a shaded view, which is very helpful. I can also change my detail level here, but we're going to keep it on fine for now. So when we clicked on, let's go back to the reference level, and you can see we drew our profile, and we did have dimensions to be able to draw that profile. But if I go back to my 3D view at view number 1, we didn't have any way to control the height. Now if I click on my box, you can see there's these little grips. Now I can use these grips to kind of modify this box right now. But I want to point something out to you over here. You can see that in the properties, when I click on this box, there is an extrusion start and an extrusion end. Now the extrusion start was at that reference plane on the reference level. So if we go to the front view, and a lot of times what I like to do is, if you see this little view cube over here, this will tell you what view you want to go to. So we want to go to the front view to take a look at the front of this little cube. So I'm going to double click the front view here, and let's zoom in. And you can see that the reference level right here is 0, 0. So if we click on our box again, you can see that the extrusion start is actually at 0. So if we wanted to make the extrusion start -1, we could, and you could see what happens. Now our extrusion went below the reference level. We don't want that. We're going to go back to 0. Now what I can do is I can control the height by this parameter extrusion end right here. So in this case I do want it to be 1, but if I wanted it to be 6 inch, I can change it here, and you can see my extrusion will now go to 6 inches. But I do want it to be 1 for this, and everything's looking great. So let's go back to our 3D view, view number 1. And now that we have this box created, let's go ahead and save the family name. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, Family, and I'm just going to go to the folder where I want to save my family. And if you ever want to save the location you're in, you can go down here to Tools and Add Current Folder to Places. And now we have it right up here, so we can always access that very easily. Now I'm going to name this family. We're going to call it Box Family. And then under Options, I'm going to set this to 1. Now it's up to you how many backups you want to set. Typically when I'm working in families, I don't need a ton of backups, but if you do want to do that, you could set this to as many as you'd like, especially when you're first creating your family. So I'm going to click OK. And we're going to save this as Box Family. And you can see the file type is down here. It's a .rfa file. We're going to click on Save, and you can see up here that the name of the family changed to Box Family. Now let's load this into the project, and you can see I have a little box right here. Now the one thing to notice is that the cursor is in the middle of my box, and that's because my box was created with those reference planes in the middle of the box. So if I hit Escape and we go back to our family, let's go back to the reference level of the family. Remember, we have the reference planes right in the center of this box. So this is the insertion point. So that's very important when you're creating your families, that you create a family that has the correct insertion point for modeling. So if we go back to the 1-mech, you can see that we have this little box. Now the reason it's gray, it's because the box is a generic model. Now we never changed the family category. We just left it a generic model. So Revit's going to display that as a light gray in this view. But if we change the discipline of this view to, I don't know, coordination, you can see it does get darker. So Revit's going to display things based on its visibility or its object styles. And so generic models is set to be light gray in a mechanical discipline view. So now that we have this box, you can see once I click on it, there's really nothing we can do with this box. We can copy it around. So if I hit Control C or C, I can copy it, I can move it. But when we click on it, you can see that we don't really have any control over its geometry right here. Let's click on Edit Type, and you can also see we don't have any control of its geometry over here either. Now, when you're making a family, you want to be able to control the geometry of the family because you want to be able to manipulate it to be different sizes based on the size of your equipment, the size of your plumbing fixture or air terminal or anything. So I'm going to click OK here. Now let's give this family the ability to flex, as I call it. Now if I want to go back into the family editor, I could easily just click on one of the views right here, but I can also click on the family and go up to edit family right here, and that will bring the family editor back up. You can also just double click on the family. So I'm going to click up here to edit family, and now we're back into our box. Now we're going to go to the 3D view over here, so I'm going to double click and we have our box. Now what I need to do is I need to create some parameters so that I can control the size of this box. So let's go back to reference level, so we'll double click over here. Now the first parameter value I might want to add is the width of this box. I want to be able to control how wide the box is. So remember, when we click on it, we can control the grips right here by stretching it over and over, but that's really obviously not what I want. I want it to kind of stretch equally on both sides. So I'm going to hit Control Z, Control Z. Now the way you want to control the dimensions is by using reference planes. So we're going to use some reference planes to control the dimensions of this box. So let's go up to Create, Reference Plane. And once I'm in this tool, there's two options. I can draw the reference plane, or I can pick the line to create another reference plane. So if I just draw the reference plane, I can literally just draw it, click, and draw it anywhere. Now the problem with doing this is when I'm drawing it, the reference plane is not centered about this axis right here. So to make it centered, obviously I could move it over and I could maybe eyeball it. But to make it exactly perfect, what I like to do, so let's delete this one. Let's click it and delete it. Let's go back to Create, Reference Plane. I like to use the pick lines. And what that will allow me to do is set an offset. So let's set the offset to 2 feet. And once we hover into the reference plane right here, you can see that there's a reference plane showing up above it. And what it will do is it will create it the same size as this original reference plane that was in our model. So I'm going to hover into this and click, and look at that. It makes it perfectly the same size and at the same spot. So let's do another one below it right here. Click, and then let's hover in and do another one to the right and another one to the left. There we go. So let's hit escape. And what we're going to do is we're going to lock the geometry of this extrusion to these reference planes. So the way we do that is we click on our little extrusion, and remember these grips, all we have to do is move or drag the grip over until it clicks on the reference plane right here. You can see it highlights and then deselect. And then what we can do is click this little lock button. Now what that allows us to do is now the extrusion grip is locked to this reference plane. So now when I click on my reference plane and I move the reference plane around, look at that. It moves my little box as well. So let's click right there and it's locked. So let's do the same thing for the left side. So let's just move it around and lock it. So we'll click and now we have it locked. So we can control the size of this box with these reference planes. So that's looking great. But remember, we have a box. We want it to be equal on both sides. So the way we do that is we use an equality dimension. Let's go up to Annotate. We're going to use an Align dimension. And anytime you're using an equality dimension, you want to select the strong reference first. So in this case, my strongest reference is my center left-right reference. So I'm going to click it, and we're going to click on the right reference plane over here. We'll click, and then we're going to go over to the left, and we're going to click this reference plane. Click, and then just click some white space over here. Now once I do that, you can see there's this little EQ button, and once we click that, it will automatically lock these dimensions to be equal. So if I hit escape here and then I go and move this reference plane, both reference planes will move equally. And that's exactly what I want, because I want the center point to always be about the origin right here, or my insertion point. So that's looking great. But remember, what we need to do is we need to create a width parameter. So the way we create a width parameter is we create a dimension first. So let's go back up to Create, or Annotate, sorry, Aligned, and then we just select this reference plane and this reference plane, and we're going to click some white space up here. And once we do that, we can hit escape, we can select the dimension, and up here we have this Create Parameter button. So we're going to click that, and what pops up is the parameter properties dialog box, and this allows us to create parameters. So in this case, we want it to be a family parameter because we want to control it inside of the family, and we're going to name this the width. Now, typically when I'm doing family parameters, I usually use all caps here, and that way I know which ones are the family parameters that I've created and which ones are the out-of-the-box parameters that Revit has created. So we'll talk about that in a second. So for this, I'm going to leave it as type because I want the different types of boxes to have different widths. And we'll go over instance in a little bit. And I'm just going to click OK. You can see that the discipline and the length or type of parameter is grayed out. And that's because we clicked on a dimension. So Revit automatically knows that this is a length parameter. You can't make it anything else. You can't make it text. You can't make it anything. It is a length, so Revit knows it's going to be a length. So we're going to click OK here. And now we have this new parameter made called width. We could change it right here by clicking into it, and we could go back to 1 foot. And you can see Revit will automatically put the width back to 1 foot. Now this parameter can be accessed by going up to the family types button up here, clicking, and you can see our family types, we have this brand new parameter called width. And remember what I was saying, by making it all caps, you can see that this default elevation was automatically placed inside the family when we created it, and that was created by Revit. But this width that has all caps was created by me, and that's why it's all caps. So we could change the value right from this dialog box. So if we want to make it 2 feet, we can hit apply, and you can see it will stretch. Anytime you're building families, you want to be flexing them as you're building them because you want to make sure everything's working properly. So this is looking great. I'm going to go back to 1 here, and we're going to click OK. So now what we're going to do is we're going to control the depth. Now the reason I'm using depth, let me go to the 3D view. Now the width is easy to kind of know is because if we're looking at the front of this thing, the width is right here. That's how wide this box is. Now, I like to use depth for the distance right here because typically the depth is like the depth from the wall. And so we're going to use, as this dimension, we're going to call this one depth. You could use different names, but I think depth makes the most sense. So let's go back to reference level up here, or we can go down here to the project browser. And we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to move these little equality dimensions up so they're kind of out of the way. And we're just going to click on our little box, and we're going to move the grip up to this reference plane and lock it, and then down to this reference plane and lock it. Remember, we want to check to make sure everything's working, so I'm going to use my arrow keys this time, and we'll just make sure that the reference plane is locked to the extrusion. So it's moving, that's looking great. Now let's put in equality dimension, so let's go up to annotate, aligned. We're going to hit the strong dimension first, which is the front back reference plane. We'll hit this one next and hit this one next and click some white space, and we're going to set it equal. There we go. Again, we're going to click on one of these and flex it, and everything's working perfectly. I'm holding shift while I'm going up and down on my keyboard, and that way it's allowing me to go bigger increments. If you don't hold shift, it will go in lower increments. Okay, we got this. Now let's create a depth parameter. So let's go up to annotate. First we have to create a dimension. So let's click here and click some white space. We'll hit escape, we'll click the dimension, and we'll create a parameter. This time we're going to call this depth, and it's going to be a type, and everything's looking good. So let's click on OK. So now we have it depth, and we can click on the dimension and set it to 1 foot. And now we have our 1x1 box. Now if you want to move the EQs, you can move them like way out here because they're not really relevant. You could even hide them, but let's not hide them because we want to make sure that we don't forget about them. But it's always a good idea to kind of move your dimensions out of the way because this box is going to get bigger and we don't want the dimensions to be in the way. So this is looking really good. So now let's add one more parameter. So let's go to our 3D view over here and click view 1, and we want to be able to control the height. Now there's a couple different ways we could do it. I want to show you one way that's kind of simple. Remember when we clicked on the box, we had this extrusion end distance right here. Now we can control this inside of Revit, but we had no way to control it once it was in the project. So if we set this to 2 You can see our box grows. I want to be able to control this parameter right here. So if you ever have a parameter in your properties that you want to control, see these little box buttons over here? You can click it and say associate family parameter. So let's click that button, and Revit will take this parameter called extrusion end and map it to a parameter that you create. So let's create a brand new parameter, and we're going to call this height. It's going to be a type, it's a family parameter, and it's a length. Again, Revit knows it's a length, so we're going to click OK. Click OK. And now we have this brand new parameter. Now you can't see it here, but remember, if we go to the family types up here, we have this parameter height right here, which we can control. So if we make this 1 and hit apply, now we can control the height of our box. So remember, we're always stretching things to make sure that they work. So let's go up to 3 feet. That looks good. Let's go back to 1 foot, hit apply. Everything's working perfectly. So you can see that this is actually called the family types dialog box, and that's because you can kind of control the different types of families that you make for this family. So if we want to create a brand new one, so I'm going to click on new type, and I'm literally going to call this type 1. I'm going to click OK. Now if I wanted to make a type 2 that was a different size, I could just click this button again and we'll make it type 2. And for the type 2, let's make every dimension 2 by 2 by 2 and hit apply and click OK. Well, we'll just hit apply. Now when we scroll back to type 1 here and hit apply, you can see that the different types have the different dimensions. So if I go to type 1, type 2, it's going back and forth between these two types. Now I don't actually want type 2, so if I want to delete a type here, I'm going to click on type 2 and I'm going to click on this delete type button. So now you can see it deleted it, and now I only have type 1. So this is exactly what I want. So I'm going to click on OK, and we're going to load it into the project. Now this dialog box is going to pop up a lot. Now it's important to understand what's going on here, but I'm going to give you the rule of thumb. Anytime this pops up, it's saying you're trying to load the box family right here, which already exists in the project. Because remember, we already loaded it in earlier. What do you want to do? Now, since we made changes to the box family, if we click the top one, it will basically overwrite the existing version with the new stuff that we put in it. So we put some new reference planes in it, and that's about it. Now, this bottom one here, it's saying, do you want to overwrite the existing version, which is the same as the top one, and its parameter values? So if we had made changes to the height, the width, and all that stuff, if we changed all those dimensions and parameter values, it would load those parameter values in. Usually you always want to use the top one. And that's because you don't want to mess with the existing family dimensions and stuff inside of your project. Now, once you understand what you've been doing when you're creating families, there might be times where you do want to use the bottom one, but always start off by just using the top one. So we're going to click OK, or overwrite existing. So I want to go to a 3D view. So let's go to 3D down here, and let's zoom in, and let's change this view again to coordination so it shows up a little darker, and that looks great. So now we have our two little boxes. Now if I click on the box, you're going to see something different. So right here, we still don't have any control of the family. But remember, we made parameter types, or type parameters. So if we click on Edit Type, you can see we now have the ability to change the depth, the height, and the width. So if we change the width to 2 feet and hit Apply, both of the boxes get 2 foot wide. If we change the height to, 4 feet, Apply, both of the boxes get 4 foot high. Now, the reason they're both changing at the same time is because they are the same type. So right here, you can see the drop down, we have type 1. Oops. So type 1. So when we loaded it in the project before, Revit automatically created this type called box family. Okay? And so that's the one we were just editing. So this is actually a good point, because you got to understand that when you're in the family editor and you're creating types, when you load it into the project, it will load those new types into your project. So if I want to delete that box family type because I don't really want this one to be in the family, I can go down to the project browser down here, And under families, I can search for this family. Now, if I click the expand command, you can see that it's going to give me all the different categories of families inside the project. Remember, we were making a generic model. So you can see right here under generic models, if we click the plus, we have our little box family. But let's say we didn't know what the category was, or we had a ton of families in our project and we wanted to quickly find this. So I'm going to hit the minus here. If I go to the top of my little families and right click, I can search. And what I'm going to search for is box and click next. And you can see anything with box in the name shows up down here. So I can kind of cycle through this, and this is taking too long. Maybe I want to search box family and click next. And look at that, it searches and it finds the box family in the project. So I'm going to hit close here. And now if I click this little plus, I have the two different types in my project. If I want to delete one of them, I can right click. So I want to delete box family. And I'm just going to click delete. It's going to say, hey, it's about to delete two instances which are already in the project. So this is actually very important because when you're deleting stuff, you always want to make sure you're deleting stuff that's not in the project. But right now I have these two boxes that are in the project, so it's popping up with this warning. I'm okay with that. So I'm going to click OK. And it went ahead and just deleted the boxes from my project. But if I want to put in some new boxes, you can actually create families by just dragging the family type into the project. And look, we can just place it. We could place one here and place one here. And we're going to hit escape. And now we have our two boxes doing the same thing that they were doing before. And we just have type 1. So when we click the drop down now, we only have type 1. All right, let's create another type. So remember, we were in the family dialog box or family editor, and we were creating different types. We can also create different types from the project. So I'm going to click on one of these guys, and I'm going to go to edit type. And to create a new type, we can just click this little duplicate button. So I'm going to click it, and Revit's going to ask me, what do you want to name this? Well, let's name it type 2. Let's click OK. And now that we have type 2, we can change the dimensions here to maybe 2 by 2 by 2 and click OK. And now I have this second type in my project. So this was type 1 right here. And then if I click this one, this is type 2. So now if I hold Control and we create another type 2, and let's create another type 1. If I change type 2 to make it even taller, so if I go to edit type, and then we change the height to maybe 4 feet, click OK, both the type 2s will change at the same time because they are a type. If I go to my type 1s and I change these and make these maybe shorter, let's go to 6 inches and hit apply. Now both of them change because they are the same type. Now remember what I was talking about when we were in the family editor and we loaded it into the project? Let's kind of go over how that works again. So I'm going to click on my box and go to edit family, and let's go to our 3D view here, and let's click on family types. And you can see I only have type 1 in the family editor, and that's totally fine because we created type 2 inside the project, so it's not going to show up in the family editor. But if we change the dimensions of type 1, and let's make type 1, let's make it pretty big. Let's make it 3 by 3 by 3 and hit apply and click OK. And now we have this giant 3 by 3 by 3 for type number 1. If we load it back into the project, now if we overwrite the existing version and its parameter values, type 1 should go to a 3 by 3 by 3. So let's do that. Let's click this button this time. And you can see type 1 now is a 3 by 3 by 3. Okay, so that's the difference between overwriting the existing and overwriting the existing parameter values. So I'm going to Control Z that. And let's do the same thing, but instead let's just load it in instead of overwriting the existing parameters. So I'm going to go back to my 3D view. I'm going to click on family types. We got 3 by 3. That looks good. We're going to click OK. Let's load it back into the project. And remember, this time we're not going to select the parameter values. We're just going to overwrite the existing version. And look at that, nothing happens. Okay, so that is the main difference of those two options. So now that we have our box and it's working pretty well and we like it, let's go ahead and go back to the family editor. So we can click on the box itself and click edit family. We have our box here. If we go to family types here, we want to set the family to 1 by 1 by 1 again. Hit apply and make sure we only have type 1 up here and click OK. Now I want this to be a starter family for my future families that I'm going to be creating. And the reason we want that is because we don't want to have to create these new dimensions every single time, all these reference planes. We just want to be able to start with our box and get going when we're creating families. So what I call this is a seed family. This is a family, it's like a starter family. And that way anything that's in the shape of a box can be easily created with this family by manipulating the parameter values that we set, the depth, width, and the height. Oh, one thing to mention. I want to change this order right here. So how do I do that? Well, if we click on one of the parameter values, we can click these little arrows down here. So I'm going to move the height down and I'm going to move the width up. So it's going to be width, depth, height. And I like the way that looks. So I'm going to click OK. So remember, we're going to save this family. So I'm going to just click this little save button and it's going to save it as the box family right here. And this is perfect. So I'm going to go back into my projects. So I'm going to click on 1-mech right here, maybe 3D. And what we're going to do is we're going to delete the box family from our project and load that final family into the project again. So I'm going to go right here. We're going to right click box family and we're going to delete it. It's going to say you're going to delete all these 4 instances. That's okay. We'll go back to our little box family right here. Let's load it into the project right here. Let's just click right there. Hit escape, and now we have our brand new box family right here loaded into the project of type 1 that's 1 by 1 by 1. Now we are completely finished. So we're going to create a bunch of these little box families that have different little properties so that we can easily start modeling very fast when we're building families. So in the next video, we're going to go over how to create an instance family. So right here, this is a type family. So if we go to edit type, we can change the different types of boxes or different type parameters for these width, depth, and height parameters. So when we want different sizes of boxes, we can do that right here. But what if we want one box to be a bunch of different sizes and we don't want to have to create all these different types in our projects? We're going to go over that next, and it's going to be using instance parameters. So in the first lesson, we created this little box family, and it was a type, meaning that we could change the types right here inside the type properties, so we could change these dimensions to anything we want. Now the next family we're going to create is the instance type box, where we can use one family and have multiple different sizes. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. So before we start, I'm going to go to View, and we're going to close the inactive windows. And I'm just going to have my family editor window right here and my project window right here. I want my project to always be on the far left, so I'm going to move that over. And to go in our family, remember, we can either click up here, edit family, or just double click on this little box. So this is the box family. Now we should have probably renamed this to box family type, so let's do that. So let's go to File, Save As, Family, and we're going to call this box family type and click Save. And so now we've saved it to a box family type. Let's load it into the project, and we're going to click here. So we have our old one that's just called box family right here, and this one should be box family type. Perfect. Now let's delete this original box family from the project because we don't want to get confused. So I'm going to hit delete, click OK, and we have our box family type. This is great. So let's go back to our family by clicking on view number 1. And now we're going to save this as a different family because we're going to create an instance family this time. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, Family, and instead of type, you guessed it, we're going to use instance, and we're going to click Save. So you can see up here, my box family changes to instance. This looks good. And let's start manipulating this thing. So let's go to our reference level. So we're going to go to Floor Plans, reference level over here. And right now we have our width and our depth set to type parameters. Now let's say we want to change those parameters to instance. All we have to do is go to the Family Types button up here, and for width I'm going to click on the parameter right here, and you can see we can now edit the parameter, we can create a new parameter, delete the parameter, or move it up and down. Let's edit this parameter. And all we have to do is change it to instance, just like that. Click OK. And you can see that Revit will put this little default right here. And that just kind of tells us that it's an instance parameter. And it tells us this is going to be the default value when we load it inside of Revit. Let's do the same thing for depth. So let's click on Edit. And let's change that to instance. Click OK. And let's go to height. Let's click Edit. Change it to instance. And click OK. So now we have these new parameter values that are set to instance. So let's click OK here. Nothing really changes. We still have our box. Let's take a look at it in a 3D view. Nothing's changed. So everything's looking great. Let's now load this instance box into our project. So click on Load into Project. Should open that 3D view, and let's put our little instance box right here. And click Escape. Now you'll notice when we select this one, we go to Edit Type. We have the parameter values right here. Now when we click on this one, you can see that the name is instance. We have type 1 here. That's looking good. But you'll notice now, look at these parameter values. They've now shifted to this dialog box right here. We don't have to click on Edit Type. If we click on Edit Type, there is no parameter values anymore. And that's because when you create instance parameters, they are actually going to show on the main properties dialog box right here. That's because they are instance, meaning they can be changed for each different type of box. So if we create another one here, remember last time we had those two different boxes that were, or we had a type 1 box and we duplicated it. So now we have two type 1 boxes, but this time if I change the height here to, let's say 3 feet, look at that. Only this box changes. They are still the same type. If I select both of them, they are still type 1. But only one of them has changed. So that's the difference between an instance and a type parameter. I can change the instance for this instance of the box family or type 1. So this is looking good. So this is why we want to always be flexing our families inside of the project to make sure everything's working correctly. Now I don't really need this one anymore, so I'm just going to click delete. So this is looking pretty good. Now let's take a look at this family that we just created on a floor plan. So let's go to the coordination view, 1-mech, and let's zoom in to these new families. So this one was the type. You can see it right here. Let's just move this one over. And then when we click on this one, this is the instance. Now you'll notice a big difference. The instance parameters give us these grips. And these grips are really great because they allow us to change the dimensions of this box very easily. So this is looking really good. So I'm going to hit Control Z on that because I want it to go back to 1 by 1 by 1. Now that is the main difference when you create an instance parameter, is that it will give you those little grips. Now the reason why the grips are showing, if we go back into the family and reference level, the grips are showing because they are between two reference planes. So in this case, the dimensions that we did, which is the depth and the width, are between this reference plane and this reference plane. So Revit knows to show the grips to be able to modify these reference planes. So if we go back and we click on it, that's why you'll see the grips here and here. Now everything's looking great. I really like the instance box that we made right here, so I want to save it. So let's go back to our family. Let's click on Edit Family. And let's go to a 3D view here, make sure it looks great. And let's go ahead and save it. So let's click the Save button. And we've now saved our box family instance in our folder. And so let me go actually to File, Save As, show you guys what I mean. So now we have the box family type and the box family instance. Now you can see these .0001. That is just my backups. Remember, we set the backups to 2. So we can easily delete those anytime we want. But for now, we have our instance, we have our type, and we have this box family. We don't need this one anymore, so I'm just going to click delete. We could also delete the backups. We don't really need those right now. So we have our two families that we've created, and we're going to load both of those in that project, and we're just going to keep going. We're building our family collection inside this project, and then we're just going to save all of our families and save that project to make it a template file for when we're building families. So let's go back to our floor plan, and we have our type, we have our instance, And there's one more type of family that I want to show you guys how to build. So if we go to the 3D view right here and I click on my instance, you're going to see that there's no grips for changing the size of this family in a 3D view. It would be nice if we had some grips that we could manipulate inside a 3D view for this little box instance family. So I'm going to show you guys how to get some grips on the 3D view. So if we go back into our reference level for the family, or click Edit Family, what we have to do, instead of using reference planes, if we use reference lines, Revit will allow us to show grips to manipulate the family. So let's go ahead and save this as, so File, Save As, Family, and we're going to call this one Instance 3D Grips, something like that. We can always change the name later. So we're going to click Save. We have our new family name up here and everything's good. So unfortunately we have to delete all of our reference planes, so I'm just going to select all of them by holding Control and just click Delete. Now they are gone. So let's do the same thing, but we're going to use reference lines this time. So we're going to go to Create, Reference Line, and again we can use the Pick Axis or Pick Lines, and we can just hover in. Remember, we have to set the offset, so it's not going to work unless we set it. So let's set it to 2 feet. We're going to hover in, click, hover in, click, hover in, and hover in. We got our 4 reference lines this time. You can see they're a different pattern. They're solid. So this is looking great. Now let's lock the dimensions. So let's click on our little box. Let's lock the dimension here, lock the dimension here, lock the dimension here, and lock the dimension here. Just like that. Let's take a look at our 3D view. So let's double click view number 1 here. And we have these brand new reference planes. Everything's looking great. Or sorry, reference lines. You can see the lines look a lot different because there's a lot more going on with those. We'll get into more detail for the lines later. But it's a very powerful technique. So now we have these reference lines that we've created. Now we need one more reference line to be able to control the height of this thing. Because right now, let's load it into the project and see what it looks like. Oh boy, this is big. Click. Let's go to our 3D view. We got this giant block that we created. It's 2 by 2, and nothing's happening. So we forgot to do something. I'm kind of glad we did because now you can see what's going on. So we still have these parameters over here. If I change this to like 3 foot, look at that, nothing is happening. That's because we forgot to dimension this thing and put the parameters on those dimensions. So let's go back to our view, reference level. And what we need to do is we need to create those dimensions again. So let's annotate, aligned. First, we need to create our quality dimension. So let's click, and click EQ here. And then we'll create one more dimension. And this is going to be our depth. So I'm going to click on it. And since we already created the parameter values, we can go up here and just select depth. And it will automatically go to 1 by 1 or 1. Let's do the same thing. We'll annotate, align dimension. Click the center point or center reference plane here. Drag this up. Click EQ. I'm going to move this up a little more. We're going to create another dimension, align dimension this time. Click, click, click. We'll select our dimension and change it to the width. Now it's 1, so this is looking great. Let's load this into the project and see what it looks like. We can just overwrite the existing. We are going to overwrite with the parameter values too. And you can see it changes. I don't think something's working. Let's go back to our reference level, make sure this is making sense. All right, so let's go back. Let's click on our family right here. And you can see we still have the width right here. We need to change that to 1, and that looks good. So let's go to our 3D view, click on our box, and now you can see that we have these little these little grips in our 3D view for our instance 3D grips, which is great. So now when I move these around, you can see that the parameter values are changing over here, and I can easily manipulate this thing. But unfortunately, I don't have any way to change the height in this view. It would be nice, right? I can still change the height here by entering a value, but I want to be able to use the grips to also manipulate the height. So let's go back into the family. And what we need to do is let's go to a 3D view and let's look at this thing from this view, and we want to go to this plane right here, or this view. So remember, look at the view cube. You can see it's the front view. Let's go to the front. So let's double click on it. And what we need to do is we need to create another reference line up here, so that way we can create a dimension and Revit will know it can use those grips, because grips only show when you're in between two reference planes or reference lines. So in this case, we're going to use a reference line. Let's go to Create, Reference Line. We're going to pick the line. We'll use an offset of 2 feet. The reason why I'm using 2 feet is because I want it to go up here. So I'm going to hover into this reference plane down here and click. We've created this new reference line up here. We're going to click our extrusion. We're going to drag it up and lock it. That looks great. Now let's create a dimension. So we're going to go to Annotate, Aligned, and we're going to click on this reference plane right here. But before we do it, here is something very important. When you're dimensioning from the front view, you need to make sure you select the correct reference plane. So you can see when I hover into this, this says reference. If I tab, it now says reference plane. So I need to make sure that I select the correct reference plane. So not this one. So this is the reference level. I need to tab into it and select this reference plane. Click, and then we'll click our reference line, and we'll just click right here. And now instead of the parameter value being assigned to that extrusion up here, we're going to assign it to this dimension. So I'm going to click this, and we're going to hit the drop down here, and we're going to go to height. And now we have this new height parameter. So let's change this to 1. And let's go ahead and load this into our project now. Overwrite the existing. Let's do the parameter values as well. For some reason that's not working. But now look at this. We have this new grip up here that we can use to control the height of our box, which is great. So now if we want to just set this thing back to 1 by 1 by 1, we can easily do it right here. And look at that. We have all of our little grips and everything is looking extremely good. Look at that. So we have our 3 little boxes, and I'm happy with this family, so let's go ahead and save it. So let's go back into Edit Family. All of our reference lines have been drawn. Let's look at the 3D view. You can see the reference lines that we created. We created this one for the width, this one for the depth, and then you can see this one up here is for the height, and that looks perfect. So let's save this guy. So let's just click the little save button. And now we've saved all of our little box families. So this is going to get us very far. So let's go back into our project, our 3D view. And I want to go to the floor plan. I just want to make this look nice and pretty. Got these little 3 guys right here. Let's go to our 3D view. And essentially what we have is the building blocks for any family that is a box, basically. So our mechanical equipment, all kinds of stuff looks like boxes. So now we can easily start with these families when we're creating more complex stuff. Now, one thing to note is all of these families had an origin point in the middle. So if I go to the floor plan 1-mech, remember if I create similar, if I right click and create another one of these, the origin point or the insertion point for this family is always in the center, and that's great. I do want that, but that is important to know. So if I create another one here, you can see the origins in the center, and this really does help me to make sure things are lined up. So that's looking good. So one thing we might want to do is we might want to rename these families so that we know they are a center origin type family. So what I've done here is I've opened up all the families that live in the computer folder, and I'm just going to change these or add one more thing to the name. I'm going to call it center origin, and we're just going to add that to every one of these so I know exactly when I'm creating families, I know that these have an origin in the center. So it doesn't matter that these are a super long name. This is really just for me when I'm building my families, because most of the time when we're building this family, we're going to change the name anyway. So I'm just doing this to organize it so that way I know that all of these families that I've created right here have a center origin. So that's it for creating our little center origin families. We're going to do the same thing, but the next time we're going to create ones that have a back origin, which can be very helpful when we're creating things like plumbing fixtures or anything that needs to go on a wall.